going on in Ohio. There's going to be a vote. August is a great time to have an election. But there's going to be a statewide vote in, like, I guess it's 6 days. What's that vote going to be, Cameron?
Yeah, so basically, I mean, the Republicans agree with you that August is not the most ideal time to have an election. They actually passed a law less than a year ago banning August elections and then reversed themselves when they decided they wanted this one. So let's step back a little bit. Basically, this is a vote about another vote. So obviously, there's been a lot of fighting over abortion rights in a lot of states. Ohio is one of those places that's a real hot spot. Republicans who control the state legislature are trying to ban it. That's been tied up in courts right now. But there's an attempt to get a referendum on the ballot in November that looks like it's probably going to be successful to make abortion a constitutional right in the state of Ohio. And Ohio is one of those states where changing the Constitution only requires a referendum of 50% plus one. So it's a relatively easy thing to pass. And Republicans aren't thrilled about that because it looks like poll after poll is showing that abortion rights has support in the high 50s in the state. So what are they doing? They've added a new referendum, constitutional amendment to change constitutional amendments to make it harder to pass them in the future. So basically they changed that 50% threshold to 60%. And they're rushing it in this August election before the November election, largely to try and make it harder to protect abortion rights in the state. But there's also a lot of other things that Democrats and unions are trying to do in the state by working around the legislature with these amendments that have gotten some business groups involved as well. So it's basically an end around democracy in the state. Republicans have managed to gerrymander themselves a really nice map. And so a Republican-leaning state is basically a deadlock for them, even though earlier constitutional amendment theoretically banned that type of aggressive gerrymandering in the state. So really the only way that voters can work around the legislature is through these constitutional amendments, and they're trying to change that too.
Okay, so we have a Republican state House and Senate, I assume 2 chambers. Both Republican dominated, and a Republican governor. So they've got the trifecta in Ohio. How did they manage to get around the constitutional amendment that said they can't gerrymander?
That was an interesting fight. That basically went back and forth in the courts for much of the last year in 2022, 2021. And even though the courts also had a Republican a slight conservative majority, they ruled that these maps weren't okay. But then in a last-minute twist, the one conservative that had sided with the liberals on that vote said, well, it's too close to the election to change things now, so let's go through this election with these maps, and then you'll have to change it in the future. So they're probably going to have to redraw it, although the Supreme Court in Ohio has actually shifted. That woman has retired, and now that there's a new conservative who is a lot less likely to side with liberals on that. So it's basically like even if these referenda go through, a Supreme Court can decide whether or not to actually accept that. And given that these are elected positions, conservatives on the Supreme Court. And this is true in many states, and it's not just conservatives, although we've seen it more with conservatives in the last couple of years, don't always act as fair and impartial judges. Sometimes they let their politics get involved.
I refuse to believe that, Cameron. We have a Supreme Court in this country, a federal one that maybe that happens on the state side, but never on the federal side. All right. Well, let me ask you this. How did so you had the abortion referendum scheduled for November, and just to be clear, the legislature said we're going to put another referendum on, but this one's not going to wait until November. They're going to do I have the sequencing right? Like the abortion.
Exactly.
So why didn't they push up the abortion one to August?
Well, they'd already put it on the ballot for November. And so it's this very long process where if you're doing it without the help of the legislature, you have to go out and gather all these signatures. You have to get a bunch of support from 44 counties in the state. I forget the exact specific details. But it's a process. It takes a lot of money. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of signatures. You have to get it verified. And so they went through this pretty heavy lift to do so. The legislature can opt to do it themselves, so they don't have to go through that heavy lift. So, and actually one of the things that they're trying to change, it's not, the big top line here is they're trying to change the threshold from 50 to 60% of the vote, which, you can make an argument for or against whether it's a good idea to have voters, deep pocketed interests spending a bunch of money on ads for voters to change a state constitution. And having lived in California for a bit, we've seen some pretty crazy referenda pass there over the years that maybe not super helpful. So, I'm not saying this is a complete black and white issue, but when you start looking at some of the other things they're trying to do here, it's not just the 60% threshold they're trying to push. They're also trying to make it significantly harder to actually get things qualified for the ballot in the first place by raising the threshold in terms of how many counties you have to qualify in, threshold at those county levels, and also making it harder so that if people get signatures that it's unclear whether or not they're real, maybe they put down an old address or maybe it's illegible, something like that. There's currently a cure process where you can go after, if signatures are getting tossed out and go, hey, this was you, right? And reach out to the voters and be like, oh, yeah, that was me, and then fix it. And then that vote can count. And they're trying to get rid of that cure process. So that's pretty explicitly anti-democratic and problematic. And so, they're basically trying to ram this through, and pro-life groups really try to push this. And frankly, the Republicans weren't super thrilled about this. I think they knew this was going to be a losing issue for them and cost a bunch of money. And, they were not into August referenda. They just banned it. Pro-life groups really were upset about this, and they pushed really, really hard in the state legislature. They failed a couple times, finally got it through. And I think Republicans are kind of reluctantly going along with this. And we've seen some business groups get involved with it because another possible referenda is raising the minimum wage by constitutional amendment in the state that some groups like the Chamber of Commerce don't want to see too. So they're starting to spend money on this as well. But we've really seen pro-choice groups as well as civil liberty groups like the ACLU spend pretty heavily on this. We've seen a lot of out-of-state money pouring in, but it's been mostly in an effort to stop this August referendum from passing. So we've seen the money kind of tighten up in the last few weeks. But it seems to me from the polls and from the early turnout that this is likely going down in flames, although with an August turnout, low turnout election can be a little unpredictable.
So by likely go down in flames, the no votes on this amendment to amend essentially to change how amendments happen in the future. So this one's subject to 50%, but it's basically saying in the future we want it to be 60%. This is like a classic case of like, let's, get in and shut the door, pull up the ladder type of situation, because the Republicans at this point feel like they're going to control the state government, despite the way that voting may actually break down in the state, that they're going to control the state government. So when you say down in flames, you're talking like, do you have a sense? Has there been any polling of this? And how?
Yeah, there's been some scattered public polling, some of it better than others. The best poll that I saw was a USA Today Suffolk poll, which had opposition to this in the mid to high 50s. I think it was 56 or 57%. Those in favor of it were under 30%. So it doesn't strike me as particularly popular. The early polling of this race reflected similar numbers. From what I've heard from Democratic strategists, this lines up pretty closely with their own internal polling. That they're pretty confident this is going to fail. I ran into Sherrod Brown, the Ohio Democratic senator, getting lunch the other day in the Senate cafeteria and asked him about it, and he said that he was pretty confident that, I don't remember exactly his phrase, but that this is going to lose, and the referendum was not going to pass. So Democrats seem not too concerned. Liberals seem not that concerned that this is going to pass at this point. But look, it's unpredictable, right? It's an August referendum. The reason people don't like doing these August referendums, besides the fact that it's incredibly expensive, is everyone's on vacation, right?
Everybody's on vacation. Nobody's paying attention to stuff.
Yeah.
You're getting ready, maybe like you're either wrapping up your summer or you're getting ready to send the kids back to school, and it's just a month of transition. And so it's very classically, a poor time to run election. If you want a big turnout, it really just depends on how energized one side or the other is for an August election. Let me ask you this. Why and I guess maybe the idea was you don't want to wait a year, but were Democrats contemplating having the referendum on abortion rights in 2024? I mean, this is certainly back in 2004, the Bush re-election campaign basically provided for, if I remember correctly, maybe 7 or 8, maybe it was 6 states around the country to have a state constitutional amendment against marriage equality at that time. They were running the playbook that they're running now in terms of transphobia. They were doing that at the time on marriage equality. And there's a lot of reason to believe that the margin of George Bush's victory in 2004 was a function of bringing out a lot of those evangelical voters who wanted to stop marriage equality in these states. Was there ever a contemplation of doing that by the Democratic Party there, or was it just that the fear of a Republican-dominated House and Senate and governor was that people were going to lose their right to an abortion?
Yeah, I think there was a real tension there, and some of the Democrats I've talked to, especially folks who are Sherrod Brown allies, were not thrilled that this was a 2023 vote as opposed to a 2024 vote. Some folks who want to see Sherrod Brown reelected in the state were hoping that this would be on the ballot with him and help turn out liberals and Democrats and young voters and women and help in 2024. And instead, it's going a year earlier. There's a big trade-off between folks whose top issue is making sure that abortion is legal and folks whose top issue is making sure the Democrats have the best chance of winning in the state. And so, we're seeing with this referendum that conservatives are trying to pull a fast one and make it so that this referendum can't go through. So there's definitely a reason for this urgency. Currently, the state ban on abortion, I can't remember what week, I think it was a 12 or a 16-week ban, don't quote me on that, is tied up in the courts. And so abortion is currently legal in Ohio, but it's unclear how long that will last. It's less than likely that tied up in courts is going to stay forever, and there's a good chance that abortion will be banned in Ohio if this referendum doesn't pass. And so we're talking about real people's lives, right? We're talking about folks who get pregnant who don't want to have a kid, and so delaying this a year for political reasons as opposed to the real life reasons of why folks want abortion to be legal, that there's a real argument why this should be in 2023. And so there were some tensions around that. But there was a clear prevalence of folks who were like, look, this is more important than just politics.
Right. And I should say, it's not just politics. Sherrod Brown is certainly one of those senators who are, in danger of losing their seat. And there's really no reason to believe that if the Republicans on a federal level get control of the Senate, they have control of the House, and they get control of the presidency, that a federal ban may go into effect, and it might not really make a difference what the state constitution says in that instance. It's
possible. I honestly think it's relatively unlikely that we would see a national ban passed, I think Republicans are pretty happy having a filibuster in the Senate because it tends to work against Democrats a lot more than it works against them, although that may change. And there's no chance in hell that either side is ever going to have 60 votes for a major abortion measure in the Senate. But I'm not saying it's impossible. I just think the politics
from your mouth to
unlikely.
God's ears, I can tell you that I had conversations 10 years ago saying that we would never see the Supreme Court overrule Roe v. Wade. So
that one doesn't surprise me quite as much.
Well, it surprised some. And look, I mean, I wouldn't bet on that, frankly, that they won't, on day one, if the Republicans have control of the Senate, that they won't get rid of the filibuster for certain things.